A Simple Soul by Gustave Flaubert. Translated and read by Leon Stevens. 1. Throughout half a century the gentlewomen of Pont-l'Évêque envied Mme. Aubaine her servant Félicité. For 100 francs a year she cooked and kept house, sewed, laundered, ironed, could saddle a horse, raise poultry, churn butter, and remained loyal to her mistress, who was not, however, a likable woman. She had married a handsome, penniless lad who died in the new year of 1809, leaving her 2 very small children along with a heap of debts. So she sold her properties except the farms at Touques and Géfosse, whose revenues amounted to 5,000 francs at best, and left her house in Saint-Mélan to reside behind the market in another, cheaper to maintain, which had been in her family for some while. This house, roofed in slate, was set between an alley and a lane that led to the river. Inside, the floors were buckled in places, which caused a lot of stumbling. A narrow hall separated the kitchen from the salon, where Mme. Aubaine spent the whole day sitting near the casement window in a wicker armchair. 8 mahogany chairs stood in line against the white painted panelling. A pyramidal stack of boxes and cartons rested on an old piano under a barometer. 2 tapestry-covered easy-chairs flanked the yellow marble Louis XV fireplace. The clock in the center represented a Vestal temple, and all the downstairs rooms smelt somewhat of mildew, for the floor was lower than the garden. Facing front on the first floor was Madame's very large room, hung with paper printed in pale flowers, and containing a portrait of Monsieur in dandy's dress. It connected with a smaller room where 2 children's beds without mattresses could be seen. Then came the parlor, always closed and filled with draped furniture. A corridor led to a study. Books and documents filled the shelves of a bookcase whose 3 sides surrounded a broad hardwood desk. The 2 panels at right angles were hidden under ink drawings, landscapes in gouache, and engravings by Audran, reminders of happier times and a vanished prosperity. A dormer lighted Félicité's second-floor room, which looked out over pasture lands. She rose at dawn to be early for Mass, and worked without pause until evening. Then, supper ended, dishes in order, and the door secured, she would bury the log under the ashes and go to sleep before the hearth, rosary in hand. No one was more obstinate at bargaining. Her cleanliness was attested by the polish of her saucepans, which was the despair of other servants. She ate unhurriedly, sparingly, and with her fingers gathered the crumbs of her bread on the table, a 12-pound loaf, baked especially for her, which lasted 20 days. All the year round she wore a printed cotton handkerchief secured behind by a pin, a bonnet hiding her hair, grey stockings, a red skirt, and a bib apron over her blouse like a hospital nurse. Her face was thin and her voice sharp. At 25 she was taken for 40. Past 50 she seemed of no particular age, and always silent, erect, and with measured gestures. She seemed a woman of wood, functioning automatically. 2. She, like any other, had had her love story. Her father, a mason, had been killed in a fall from a scaffolding. Then her mother died. Her sisters went their ways. A farmer took her in and sent her, still very small, to herd the cows in the fields. She shivered under her rags, drank pond water flat on her belly, was beaten for no reason, and eventually turned out for a theft of 30 sous of which she was innocent. She was hired at another farm where she tended the poultry, and because the owners liked her, her fellow servants grew jealous. One August evening, she was then 18, they took her along to the fair at Colleville. Suddenly she was giddy, stunned by the uproar of the fiddlers, the lights in the trees, the multicolored dresses, lace, gold crosses, that crowd of people leaping in unison. She was standing shyly to one side when a prosperous-looking young man who was smoking a pipe, both elbows resting on a cart shaft, came over to ask her for a dance. He bought her cider, coffee, cake, and a scarf, and offered to escort her home, imagining she understood his meaning. He threw her down brutally at the edge of a field of oats. She was afraid and began to cry out. He hurried away. Another evening on the Beaumont road she started to pass a large, slow-moving hay wain, and as she brushed against the wheel she recognized Théodore. He greeted her, unruffled, saying that all must be forgiven, for it was the fault of the drink. She was at a loss for words and wanted to run away. At once he spoke of the harvest and the notables of the township, for his father had left Colville for the farm at Les Échos, so now it turned out they were neighbors. Ah, she said. His family, he added, wanted him to marry. He, for all that, was in no rush, and was waiting for a woman to his liking. She lowered her eyes. Then he asked if she was thinking of marriage. Smiling, she replied that it was unkind to mock. "Oh, no, I mean it." And he encircled her waist with his left arm. She walked supported by his clasp. They slowed their pace. The wind was moist, the stars were shimmering, the huge load of hay rocked before them, and the 4 horses were raising the dust with dragging steps. Then, without a word of command, they turned to the right. He kissed her again. She disappeared into the shadows. The following week Théodore arranged to see her. They met at the back of the yards behind a wall under a solitary tree. She was not innocent like many girls. The animals had taught her, but reason and the insistence of honor kept her from yielding. This resistance so inflamed Théodore's desire that to satisfy it, or naively perhaps, he proposed marriage. She hesitated to believe him. He made great promises. Before long he confessed something that was troubling him. His parents had bought his way out of conscription the year before, but any day now he might be called again. The idea of military service terrified him. For Félicité this cowardice was a sign of tenderness. Hers for him deepened. She stole away in the night, and when she arrived at the meeting-place, Théodore tormented her with his anxieties and entreaties. Finally he declared that he would go to the prefecture himself to make inquiries and bring the papers next Sunday between 11 and midnight. The moment come, she ran to her beloved. Instead of him she found one of his friends. He informed her that she would not see Théodore again. To insure himself against conscription, he had married a very rich old lady, Madame Lucé of Tuc. Her grief was uncontrollable. She collapsed on the ground, screamed, cried out to the Lord, and lamented all alone in the country till sunrise. Then she returned to the farm, announced her intention to leave, and at the end of the month, having received her pay, wrapped her few belongings in a shawl and went on to Pont-l'Évêque. At the inn-yard she questioned a lady in widow's weeds who was indeed looking for a cook. The girl knew little, but appeared so much possessed of good will and so little of demands, Mme. Aubaine closed the matter by saying, "Very well, you will do." 15 minutes later she was settled in her house. At first it distressed her to live there because of the sort of house it was, and the memory of Monsieur hovering over everything. Paul, 7 years old, and Virginie, barely 4, seemed made of precious matter. She would carry them piggyback, and when Mme. Aubaine forbade her kissing them all the time, it hurt her deeply. She found she was happy none the less. The sweetness of her surroundings had dissolved her sadness. Every Thursday some friends of long standing came by to play a round of Boston. Félicité prepared the cards and foot-warmers beforehand. They arrived precisely at 8 o'clock and took their leave before the stroke of 11. Each Monday morning the junk dealer who lived down the alley exhibited his tawdry goods on the ground. Then the town was filled with a babel of voices, whinnying horses, bleating sheep, grunting pigs, and the dry noise of carriages in the street. Around noon, when the market was at its busiest, a very tall, hook-nosed old peasant with his cap on backwards appeared at the threshold. This was Robelin, the farmer of Géfos. A short while later Liébar came in, the small, fat, ruddy farmer of Tuc, wearing a grey jacket and leggings fitted with spurs. Both of them offered their landlady chickens or cheeses. Félicité invariably foiled their attempts at guile, and they went away with great respect for her. At irregular intervals Mme. Aubaine was visited by the Marquis de Grémanville, one of her uncles, ruined by debauchery, who lived at Falaise on the last plot of his lands. He always showed up at the dinner hour, leading a frightful poodle that leapt on all the furniture with its dirty paws. Despite his efforts to appear the gentleman, even raising his hat each time he said, "My father, God rest," led by habit he would go on drinking glass after glass and blurt a few vulgarities. Félicité would push him outside politely. "You've had enough, Monsieur de Grémanville. Some other time." And she closed the door behind him. She opened it with pleasure for Monsieur Bouret, attorney, retired. His white tie and his baldness, the frill of his shirt, his full brown frock-coat, his habit of crooking his arm to take snuff, his whole appearance produced in her that uneasiness the sight of extraordinary men gives rise to. Because he managed Madame's holdings, they would lock themselves away in Monsieur's study for hours, and always fearing to be compromised, he showed infinite respect for the magistracy, affected a knowledge of Latin. To instruct the children in a pleasant way, he gave them a geography book with engravings. They depicted various scenes from around the world: cannibals bedecked with feathers, an ape abducting a maiden, Bedouin in the desert, harpooning a whale, etc. Paul explained these prints to Félicité. This was the extent of her formal education. That of the children was undertaken by Guillot, a poor devil employed in the town hall, famed for his beautiful hand, who sharpened his penknife on his boot. When the weather was clear, they would go out early to the Géfos farm. The yard is on a slope, the house in the center, and the faraway sea appears as a grey smudge. Félicité would bring out slices of cold meat from her basket, and they would eat lunch in a room adjoining the dairy. It was the sole remains of a summer house, now gone. The wallpaper, in shreds, trembled in the breeze. Mme. Aubaine lowered her head, overcome by memories. The children dared not say anything more. "Go and play," she would tell them. They scurried off. Paul climbed in the barn, snared birds, skipped stones across the pond, or with a stick struck the great wine casks, which resonated like drums. Virginie fed the rabbits, went running to pick blue bottles, and the swiftness of her legs revealed her embroidered bloomers. One autumn evening they were coming back through the meadows. The moon in its first quarter was lighting part of the sky, and mist hovered like a scarf over the meanderings of the Touques. Oxen, lying in the middle of the sward, gazed placidly at the four people passing. In the third pasture some rose, then gathered around them. "Don't be afraid," said Félicité, and muttering a sort of reproach, she stroked the back of the one nearest. It turned round, the others followed suit. But when they had crossed the next meadow, a fierce bellowing arose. It was a bull hidden by the fog. He came toward the two women. Mme. Aubaine set off running. "No, no, not so fast!" They quickened their steps none the less, and heard a deep-toned breathing from behind that was drawing nearer. His hoofs pounded the sod of the field like hammers. Now he was at a gallop. Félicité turned back and with both hands tore up fistfuls of earth, which she hurled at his eyes. He lowered his muzzle, shook his horns, and trembled in fury, bellowing horribly. Mme. Aubaine, at the end of the meadow with her two little ones, was trying desperately to find a way to climb the high embankment. All the while Félicité retreated before the bull and continually flung grassy clods which blinded him as she cried, "Hurry, hurry!" Mme. Aubaine descended into the ditch, pushed Virginie, Paul next, fell several times attempting to clamber up the bank, and made it over by sheer courage. The bull had cornered Félicité against a wooden fence. The foam of his mouth erupted onto his face. 1 second more and he would have gored her. She had time to slide between two rails, and the great animal halted in total surprise. For years the event was a subject of conversation in Pont-l'Évêque. Félicité was not at all proud of the feat, nor even suspected she had done something heroic. Virginie was her exclusive concern, for she had developed a nervous ailment in the train of her fright, and Monsieur Poupart, the doctor, prescribed the sea-water baths at Trouville. In those times they were little used. Mme. Aubaine made inquiries, consulted Bouret, made preparations as if for a long journey. Their baggage left in Liébar's cart the day before. Next morning he brought 2 horses. One had a woman's saddle furnished with a velvet backboard, and across the other's croup a rolled overcoat provided a kind of seat. Félicité took charge of Virginie, and Paul straddled Monsieur le Chaptois' donkey, lent on condition that he be handled very carefully. The road was so bad its 5 miles cost them 2 hours. The horses sank to the pasterns in the mire and jerked their haunches to free themselves, or else they stumbled in the ruts. At times they had to jump. Liébar's mare suddenly halted at certain places. He waited patiently until she resumed her gait, and he spoke of the people whose properties bordered the road, adding moral reflections to their stories. Thus, in the centre of Touques, as they were passing under some windows encircled by nasturtiums, he said, shrugging his shoulders, "Here we have a woman, Madame la Houssaye, who, instead of taking a young man—" Félicité did not hear the rest. The horses trotted. The donkey galloped. They filed along the path. A gate was opened. 2 boys appeared, and they dismounted before the manure pile at the very doorstep. At sight of her mistress, Mother Liébar was lavish in her expressions of joy. She served her a lunch of sirloin, tripe, blood pudding, chicken stew, sparkling cider, fruit custard, and prunes soaked in brandy, all accompanied by kind remarks to Madame, who was looking in the best of health, Mademoiselle become magnificent, Monsieur Paul especially robust, without forgetting their deceased grandparents, whom the Liébars had known, having served the family for several generations. The farm, like them, had an ancient character. The ceiling beams were worm-eaten, the walls black with smoke, the window-panes grey with dust. An oak cabinet contained all sorts of utensils, jugs, plates, pewter bowls, wolf-traps, sheep-shears. An enormous syringe made the children laugh. Not a tree in the 3 yards that did not have mushrooms at its foot or a clump of mistletoe in its branches. The wind had toppled several of them. They had re-rooted in the open, and all of them were sagging under the weight of their fruit. The thatched roofs of unequal thickness, which had the look of brown velvet, resisted the strongest squalls. The cart shed, on the other hand, was falling into ruin. Mme. Aubaine said she would have it attended to, and ordered the animals reharnessed. It took another half-hour to reach Trouville. The little caravan went on foot to traverse the coeur, a high cliff with some boats at its base, and 3 minutes later, at the end of the quay, they entered the yard of the Golden Lamb, which belonged to Mother David. Within a few days the change of air and the properties of the baths had somewhat restored Virginie. Having no bathing costume, she took them in a gown, and her maid dressed her in a customs shed made available to the bathers. Afternoons they went with the donkey beyond the black rocks, towards Ennecville. At first the path ascended between slopes that dipped and rose like the greensward of a park, then led to a plateau where pastures alternated with ploughed fields. Holly trees rose in a tangle of roadside brambles. Here and there a large dead tree made zigzags on the blue air with its branches. They almost always rested in a meadow, with Deauville to the left, Le Havre to the right, and the open sea before. Smooth as a mirror, it glittered with sun, so still they could hardly hear its murmur. Hidden sparrows were chirping, and the massive dome of the heavens encompassed it all. Mme. Aubaine, seated, was busy sewing. Virginie planted rushes nearby. Félicité was weeding lavender flowers. Paul, who was bored, wanted to leave. Other times, after crossing the Touques in a boat, they would search for shells. Low tide exposed sea urchins, scallops, jellyfish, and the children would run to catch the flocks of foam carried on the wind. The languid waves falling on the sand curled along the shore. It extended out of sight, but on the landward side its limit was the dunes separating it from the Marais, a broad prairie in the shape of a racetrack. When they returned that way, Trouville in the distance, on the slope of the little hill, grew larger with each step, and with all its houses of different size, seemed to fan out in cheerful disorder. On days when it was too hot, they stayed in their room. The dazzling brightness outside forced bars of light between the slats of the blind. Not a sound in the village. Below on the pavement, no one. This pervasive silence added to the reigning sense of peace. Far off, caulkers' hammers were thudding against boat hulls, and a heavy breeze brought in the smell of tar. The chief entertainment was the return of the fishing boats. When they had passed inside the buoys, they began to tack about. Their sails were lowered to 2/3 the height of the mast, and they advanced, foresails swollen like balloons, sliding through the chopping of the waves to the middle of the port, where they suddenly dropped anchor. Then the boats were moored to the quay. The sailors tossed the quivering fish over the gunwales. A line of wagons was waiting for them, and women in cotton bonnets rushed forward to take the baskets and kiss their men. One day one of them accosted Félicité, who entered the room all smiles a short time after. She had found one of her sisters, and Nastasie Barrette, wife of one Leroux, appeared holding an infant at her breast, another child on her right, and on her left a little cabin boy with fists on hips and a beret over his ear. At the end of a quarter hour, Mme. Aubaine dismissed her. They always met them at the kitchen door or on the walks they took. Her husband kept away. Félicité was taken with affection for them. She bought them a blanket, some shirts, a stove. Obviously, they were taking advantage of her. This weakness irritated Mme. Aubaine, who disliked besides the liberties her nephew took. He was too familiar with her son. And because Virginie was coughing and the weather was no longer fair, she returned to Pont-l'Évêque. Monsieur Bouret advised her on the choice of a boarding school. The one at Cayenne was reputed the best. Paul was sent there, and he made his goodbyes bravely, happy to go live in a house where he would have some chums. Mme. Aubaine resigned herself to her son's absence because it was strictly necessary. Virginie thought about him less and less. Félicité missed his rowdiness. But new business came to occupy her. From Christmas on, every day she accompanied the little girl to catechism.